Close brace. For JavaScript developers, by JavaScript developers. In our last tutorial, we started the process of wiring our login form to our API. We had to stop with a blank file and nothing working, which is super unsatisfying. We're going to fix that today, and you're going to see the login work, albeit only in your browser's DevTools. Baby steps, folks. Let's jump right in. Your server should still be running from last time, but if it's not, fire it up in development mode. I think at this point I can stop telling you how to do that, right? Then switch over to Sublime Text and open /source/components/account/login page container.jsx. This file should be blank. If for some reason it's not, it means you either decided to forge ahead, or your computer is haunted by ghosts, possibly from the future. Consider calling an exorcist before continuing. Anyway, here are the first 8 lines you need to add. They're all imports. We grab 2 modules, then some functionality, and then our login page component. Nothing here should be too confusing, but just a reminder that imports done with curly braces mean you're pulling individual variables or methods from a file that contains more than one, and that each of them are then accessible within your code by those names, for example, increment progress. The next thing we need to do is build our component. We're going to use a class here, and not just a pure function, because we need to bind a few helper methods. Here's the skeleton. Don't worry about the fact that this.attemptLogin doesn't exist yet. We'll fix that in a second. Below that, we're going to need to connect our component to Redux so that we can use those progress actions, not to mention other actions we're going to write later. So below the component, add the following. This is almost identical to previous connected components we've set up. Alright, let's add that attemptLogin method. Below the constructor block in our component class, but above the render block, add the following. As you can see, we have another async function here, which allows us to use await to make sure we have responses from the server before proceeding. I love async await so much. You'll also notice that we turn on and off our spinner here. Speaking of which, we're going to need to turn that into an actual spinner pretty soon. Finally, you may notice that this method takes a user data parameter. We'll be providing that in loginpage.jsx. One last thing to do here. We need to bind this method so that it can use this correctly. We do that in the constructor block by adding a line after line 12, just for some padding, and then adding the following 2 lines. We should be good here. Save the file, and then open up /source/components/account/loginpage.jsx. There's a bunch to do here as well. Remember how ESLint was complaining that we didn't need to use a class here? Well, now we do, because we're going to be manipulating component state to create controlled forms. This means React handles their values even when a user is manipulating them. Every change is stored in component state, and the forms always render what's in that state, meaning if you change it programmatically, they'll display the new string by themselves. In your constructor block, under the super line, add the following. This sets our component state, which we talked about before in tutorial 35. Now we need some methods to manipulate things. Below your constructor block, but above your render block, add the following lines of code. As you can see, we've got 2 methods which will update component state with the values of the form field as they change, and a method for snagging the form data from the state, which we'll call when they click the submit button. This will send that data back to our container, which will then pass it on to the API. We need to bind these functions, so back up to our constructor block, and below the super line, but above the state declaration, add this code. The last thing we need to do is update our form fields and submit button in our render block. These guys. Here's the change for the email field. And here's the change for the password field. And here's the button. Save this file, and open up template.jsx. We need to change line 6, our login page, to importing login page container. Save that file, and we should be good to run a test. Make sure your dev server is running, and hop over to a browser. Bring up your login page if it's not already there. Make sure to open your JavaScript console so you can see what's going on. For starters, let's test a bad login. I'm using blah@blah.com, and a password of 12345. Click the login button, and in between actions for incrementing and decrementing progress, you can see that we're getting a 400. This is expected and what we want. Now try using your actual login information. Let's go ahead and clear this. Assuming you've typed your email and password correctly, you should see a 200 response. Congrats, you've authenticated your user via the API. That's it for this one. In the next tutorial, we'll make our application respond to correct and not so correct login attempts. As always, it's a good idea to commit your latest changes to your Git repo. If you need a refresher on how to do that, check out tutorial 8 and tutorial 9. See you next time.